Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. An FBI search of President Biden's home turning up even more classified documents, while the White House reacts as some Democrats now join the call for investigations. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more.
A fourth batch of classified documents, including some from Biden's years as a senator, was found on Friday at Biden's Wilmington home. This after a 13-hour search by the FBI that the Department of Justice says was consensual. The president taking no questions when returning to the White House on Monday. His lawyers, seeking to downplay Friday's search, argue that it underscores Biden's cooperation with the special counsel's investigation. But Republicans leading their own investigations say they no longer buy the president's words.
5 different locations at least. Who knows what those personal attorneys have been doing? But now this has gone from just simply being irresponsible to downright scary.
House Oversight Chair James Comer on Monday formally asked the Secret Service for all documents about who visited Biden's home, but the White House responded, saying it doesn't have them. And at least 2 Democrats, Senator Tim Kaine and Senator Joe Manchin, are joining the call for investigations.
It's unbelievable how this could happen. It's totally irresponsible, and who's at fault?
And they aren't alone. A new poll says about 2/3 of Americans favor an investigation, with a majority of Democrats backing the idea. But the White House says it's not worried that the new findings could hurt Americans' trust in Biden.
He says, I take this very seriously. He said, I didn't know the American people. It is going to be up to them to decide how they see this president. I'm not going to go into, a rabbit hole or go into details or thoughts about polls.
All this as Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, is stepping down. But the White House on Monday wouldn't comment on the timing of the change, except for saying Klain has been a good boss. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
A gunman shot and killed 11 people at a dance club in Southern California over the weekend. He reportedly committed suicide after police tracked him down. Now some calling for stricter gun control laws. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
On Saturday night, people gathered at this dance club in Monterey Park, California to celebrate the Chinese New Year. And later that night, a 72-year-old Asian man allegedly opened fire while the community was celebrating. At least 11 people were killed.
The suspect has been identified as Hu Can Tran. He is a 72-year-old male Asian.
And shortly after the shooting, police say the gunman went to another dance club, but things went differently there.
He was disarmed by 2 community members who I consider to be heroes because they saved lives.
But the suspect was able to get away, and about 12 hours later, police surrounded Tran, who was inside a white van. As police approached the vehicle, he allegedly shot and killed himself. Investigators are trying to figure what the motive was behind the shooting. A leader within the community told ABC7 that he didn't think it was a hate crime, but a domestic dispute because Tran's wife went to the celebration while Tran was not invited.
It's not safe. So I want to say we need to change. We need the government to do some more safety issue for us.
And what are lawmakers doing to prevent another shooting from happening? Many are pointing to background checks.
Every one of these cases, and I guarantee you're going to see it in this one as well, the shooter had warning signs along the way. We just didn't respond or pick it up. So in my judgment, we could create a system. I introduced a bill that we could take public information on the internet, have an algorithm to stop the threat before it happens.
But, background checks, there's nothing wrong with them. I've had to have a background check every time I bought a gun, and the people that I know have no problem with that whatsoever.
Opponents say sufficient background checks are already in place, and more won't stop criminals from getting guns. And they say lawmakers should focus on getting weapons out of criminals' hands and boosting mental health programs. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Democrat leadership has nominated high-profile representatives Eric Swalwell and Adam Schiff to serve again on the House Intel Committee, pressing Speaker McCarthy to follow through on his vow to reject them. Speaker, meanwhile, defending seating certain Republican members like George Santos, MTG Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Paul Gosar. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
The stage is officially set for a showdown over committee assignments on Capitol Hill. Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries has officially nominated Ranking Member Adam Schiff and Representative Eric Swalwell to the Intel Committee. Both of these Democrats McCarthy has long vowed to remove from the Intel Committee. Both of them were played key leadership roles during the Trump impeachment trials. And Speaker McCarthy says the reason why he wants to remove Schiff from the Intel Committee is because he accuses Schiff of lying to the American people during those impeachment trials. Now, as for Swalwell, here's McCarthy.
If you got the briefing I got from the FBI, you wouldn't have Swalwell on any committee. And you're going to tell me other Democrats couldn't fill that slot? He cannot get a security clearance in the private sector. So would you like to give him a government clearance?
These two Democrats can be directly rejected by House Speaker McCarthy because of the nature of the Intel Committee. But another Democrat, Representative Ilhan Omar, whom McCarthy is trying to remove from the Foreign Affairs Committee, that removal will take a full floor vote. Some Democrats have said this is an act of revenge from McCarthy as a response to Democrats' removal of Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar from committees during last Congress. Democrat leader Jeffries points out in his letter to McCarthy that removing those two Republican members was bipartisan, with 11 Republicans backing Greene's removal and just 2 backing Gosar's. These two members have been reinstated to their committees, some questioning the GOP's appointments. In addition, Republicans are being scrutinized for allowing George Santos to sit on committees. Democrat leader Jeffries calling him a serial fraudster and telling McCarthy that the appointment of Santos, while denying certain Democrat seats, is a double standard. Santos will remain on his committees while legal proceedings play out. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The lack of transparency regarding the pandemic situation in China is making a lot of countries and world organizations worried. The Chinese regime's official COVID death toll remains low, despite reports of hospitals and morgues being overwhelmed. Joining us now to discuss, we have Cindy Yu, assistant editor at the British magazine The Spectator and the host of the podcast Chinese Whispers. Cindy Yu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cindy, I'd like to get your thoughts about China's transparency or lack thereof since the initial outbreak of the pandemic. Various reports of morgues being overwhelmed, bodies piling up in hospitals, yet the CCP maintains the death toll is minimal. What would their motivation be for covering up the numbers?
Well, it's what you might expect, which is that a massive death toll in China will be a political problem for the government, in the sense that the CCP has always prided itself on at least being competent, because it never said that it gave its people rights in the sense of voting rights or democratic rights, but at least it was competent. At least it was able to make people's lives wealthier, better, make people healthier. Well, that's not the case if you cannot prevent COVID from ripping through your population and having a massive death toll. And so the real number really is a very sensitive issue. I don't think that they really actually know because of the breakdown of the testing mechanisms in China. So literally, I don't think anyone is counting. Although given enough time, we will be able to see the excess death numbers, the amount of deaths that weren't meant to happen during this time. And the government has said that they will release that. But again, how accurate those are anyone's guess.
I mean, this is much greater than just inside of what's happening in China. Of course, the world is concerned about the Chinese people as well. But what impact does this have throughout the rest of the world, given the fact that we're so interconnected from both a health standpoint and travel and also economic?
Well, I think fortunately we're not in the world of 2020 anymore, and this, in the sense that vast majorities of people have been vaccinated. Pretty much everyone who wants to be vaccinated in the developed world are, and people who are not don't want to be vaccinated, and they're willing to take that risk of being infected and would prefer that to having the vaccine, which is understandable. So I think, given that we're not in that situation anymore, concerns about new variants or hyper-infections in China, we are protected. In the West, people are as protected as they can ever be. And for COVID to be accepted as an endemic issue, as a virus that's never going to go away, we have to treat it as such, and to think that, no matter if it's China or South Africa or India or wherever it is, now that we've been vaccinated, this is the future. Now, that's not to say we don't have to monitor certain variants and just keep an eye on that. And so that will be, the kind of pressure that the West and the WHO and other organizations can lay to bear. But I think in terms of public health, we're not in January 2020 anymore. That horse is long bolted.
Now, I just want to switch gears a little bit here and get your thoughts on how is the rest of the world reacting to the Biden files, specifically with the possible ties to the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, actually, when it comes to the Biden files, in China, people are not talking about it much because there's a lot going on at the moment. I mean, there's the COVID situation, there's the birth rate decline that we had numbers of just last week, and this past weekend was the Chinese New Year as well. And so there's not been much discussion of that I could see on Chinese social media of what's going on in the White House.
Now, we know the CCP wages influence campaigns in the United States, be it with our politicians, government officials, all the way to our college campuses. What is the situation like in the UK?
Well, there are very severe concerns. I think when it comes to things like Confucius Institutes, which the Americans, you guys have very clearly distanced from, in the UK there are still dozens of Confucius Institutes. And personally, I think that they are a risk we can take as long as we are mindful and we regulate them properly, by which I mean we don't need to give them free premises to be on universities. We don't need to give them waive their rents or anything like that. And we need to keep an eye on the students who go there, that they're not being spied upon, and then the stuff that they're learning about China or Chinese history is being counterbalanced by really properly independent curriculums at their university campuses. So that's one thing. Another question is over the partnerships with high-tech industries between universities, and we've got to be careful. Why should British universities be working with certain Chinese organizations to look at surveillance technology, for example? Do we really want to be contributing to that? And finally, campaign finance as well in the UK, making sure that politicians are not taking money from the wrong people, which I think all of this stuff in the UK is generally we are okay about. We just need to be mindful of the dependence problem with China. I think very few people in this country would say we can't work with China at all, but just to be mindful that if China does turn off the taps on anything in particular, that the UK is not at a loss.
Cindy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.